Hey everyone, in this lesson we're talking about chapter 32.2. This is on page 222 of Shelmerdine's text, and we're talking about reduplication, the kind of initial stutter of a lot of verbs we've seen in Greek, especially in the perfect system. So we had seen reduplication already in me verbs like tithemi and didomi, right? And we had seen at these times that the reduplication had a special vowel and a iota, and that while some unaspirated consonants like a delta could just repeat, this tithemi actually originally came from thithemi, but because of a rule known as Grassmann's law, or Grassmann, who was a German, Grassmann's law, we have a dissimilation of aspirates, because really if we were to write this out in Roman characters, right, we'd see the aspiration a little bit more clearly, thithemi, and this this doubling of the aspirates was not a nice sound to the Greek ear, and also a little bit hard for the tongue to pronounce. So this would change over time to something like tithemi. So that was the reduplication there. But that was all in these me verbs that we were seeing, the me verbs in the present. And this was only certain me verbs, right? This wasn't deiknumi, the verb to point out. We did not see that, right? So let's now erase all of this, because that's old history now, and talk a little bit more explicitly about things we've been doing ever since we started the perfect in chapter 31. So let's go back to our favorite verb, luo, right? And we have our fourth principal part, leluka. And we can see what the reduplication was. We repeated the lambda, so that's the reduplication. And then the vowel that we tend to use for this in the perfect is an epsilon rather than an iota. And then we also know that this was the weak. We can now say it's the weak perfect active kind of marker, this kappa, and then the perfect personal endings after that. So leluka, lelukas, leluke, ... We could go on. So this is reduplication, and when it's one consonant at the beginning of a verb, because remember that all of this is working off of the core of our verb, lu, which if you remember the first principal part, luo, it's just the stem of the verb without the personal ending, the omega. So that's great when we've got something like lu. It ends with a vowel, it starts with a consonant, we're ready to go. But not every verb works that way, right? So we've seen things like ago, right? So what do we do here? Are we going to make it gago? Are we going to repeat the gamma? Well, actually, no. Our stem is ag. So we can erase the omega. This is our stem that we're working with. So what we'll want to do is, in theory, a plus e plus a, ag. So we would have reduplication just like this. Well, we also have seen now that we've gotten into some of the stronger aorist, sometimes these can change, because this is a gamma ending. It's a consonant ending rather than a vowel ending. So we can't just put a kappa on the end. That's a different kind of sound. What we'll actually see happening is this gamma becomes aspirated. So this is all nice. This has nothing to do with reduplication. That's how we're getting to a gamma, or a chi here, because we have a G sound plus an H sound, and in Greek that's going to go to a CH sound, a ch. So this is great, and now we have this string of kind of extended things, and we actually never, this epsilon that we used to use to kind of separate our consonants in a reduplication doesn't come up when we do vowel reduplication. The Greek math that we're simply doing here is alpha plus alpha. So what that turns it into is a long kind of alpha sound, or an eta. So the stem that we're going to get for the perfect of ago is actually echa. So there's a method behind the madness. You're going to often find this easier just to say, oh, what's the fourth principal part? Let me look that up. Oh, it's echa. Oh yeah, an aspirated kind of kappa sound. Good, I'm ready to go. That will see you through, but it's nice to know the rules governing this. So ago was a good example. Let's take haireto. This is Shelmerdine's second example. We'll use a different color to mark that we're moving forward. So haireto, to choose, right? So if we want to put this in Roman characters, this is what we'd be looking at: an aspiration before a diphthong, before a rho, before an epsilon, before an long O sound. So there are some things that are going to be a little bit easier here. We can, because this is a vowel stem, hi, re, we can put a kappa on the end, right there. No kind of funkiness going on there, save that this is actually going to lengthen, as often happens in this situation. So I'm going to put an asterisk here while we're building the perfect from what's remaining of the present stem. So hi, we have this diphthong. How are we going to reduplicate that? Well, we're going to reduplicate the first letter of the diphthong. So this rough breathing, this H sound, just moves to the front of the vowel cluster, whatever this is going to be. And then we still have the alpha plus alpha dynamic that we had with ago, which is going to create an eta. So then we're going to be left ultimately with a rough breathing over the eta. And then we have this eta followed by an iota. Now some textbooks in Greek, this is going to be a diphthong no matter what. So you can either write it like this, or as Shelmerdine does, we're going to do iota subscript rather than iota adscript. That's what we call the iota when it's next door. So we have adscript, which is really kind of next to written, versus subscript, which in Latin would mean underwritten, written under. So hey rake, and then we can add our personal ending, is the form for this. So again, reduplication is present, it's just a little bit harder to see in some of these words that begin with vowels. Speaking of a word that begins with vowel, which has frustrated you all probably from the moment we learned it, is Othello. What stunk about this is it already looked like it had a past indicative augment, right? But then it had a primary tense ending. We had to learn that, no, this is actually just a verb that begins with an epsilon. So here, for our augment, we're going to reduplicate that initial vowel, epsilon plus epsilon, and we know our Greek math, that's going to turn out to be eta. And then how does the ending work? Well, here, a number of things could happen. As it turns out, they'll end up writing it like this. We'll have a eta that fixes itself in there after the lambda. So these things that are happening right before the kappa, right before the ending, are very unpredictable. What is pretty predictable, and why we're spending a chapter or a chapter section learning it, is this initial reduplication. This is something that we can apply algorithms to and basically come up with the right thing all the time. This ending, there are rules behind this, but it's a complex set of rules. It's not really worth getting into, but being able to identify the reduplication at the beginning is key. So this is what we've now come across two classes of reduplication. One is what we've already been learning, initial single consonant. And this is what we had with luo. So we had a stem lu, and we would repeat it. Now we can add to our kind of reservoir, our toolbox, not a single consonant, but initial vowel. In which case we would just repeat the vowel, and then often that would lead into a contraction with a different kind of ending. So epsilon plus epsilon became eta. Here we had the lambda, and we just would add this epsilon in. Now let's talk about verbs that start with a double initial consonant. Well, at this point I should probably say consonants, right? So we have some of those that just naturally will occur in Greek. But what is important to remember is we've got a lot of single simple consonants, things like this. But we do have a few, actually three, Greek letters that are digraphs, that have two different letters combined in them. So of course we have P plus sigma, right, which is our psi. Then we also have delta plus zeta, or delta plus S, I guess we should say, a kind of voiced delta. This is where we get our zeta. Sorry, let me write it a little bit more properly. And then last but not least, we have our kappa plus sigma. So we get our psi. So this is voiced, I'll just write it dz, even though that's kind of one letter, the z in Greek. These things are going to behave slightly differently. So let's work with zeteo. I don't know why I'm having a problem now drawing these zetas. Let me just do it that way. Zeteo. So now what's going to happen? Well, you would think that we would want to repeat the whole thing, but it's kind of too complicated for that. When these things, initial double consonants, start off a Greek word, they just say, let's just put an epsilon in front of there. We're not going to bother with the whole repeating the initial consonant. So, edzeteka. That's not too bad. Something that's not written with a double consonant, but is nevertheless a double consonant. And when I'm saying consonants here, what I'm not counting are these. The liquids, the rhos and the lambdas. So here you say, well, in English, that's definitely 3 consonants, but this T and R are blending together. But at least the ST, this is what makes it a double consonant of stratewo, right? To march, to behave like an army. And this is also going to get just an epsilon preceding the verb. And the verb is otherwise weak. It's very predictable. So estrateuka. So this is all well and good, and it's nice to see, well, we've just got a different sort of reduplication here. But of course, this looks a lot like the past indicative augment, right? And that's frustrating because now you want to start treating that like a past indicative augment, but it is not. This is a kind of, reduplication is a bad thing to call it because you're not really seeing any reduplication, but that's what this is. And what that means is, remember that the past indicative augment, that phrase actually means something. It had to be a past tense, which remember the perfect is not, and it had to be indicative. So when we put things in the subjunctive or the infinitive, the augment would drop away. This augment, we could say, but it's really not an augment, it's a reduplication, is going to stick in there no matter what. So if we want to have the aorist, or sorry, the perfect infinitive, we're just going to tack an ni onto that, and that what looks like an augment but is actually a reduplication is going to stick around. That's how this works. This isn't going to go away, even though it looks a lot like this past indicative augment. It's actually formed on completely different grounds. All right, so let's recap this before we move on. Reduplication was our focus, and we had already come across, without talking about it, this initial single consonant where we'd have an epsilon added, which was different from our tithames, our me verbs, where we would have a iota added. Here we have an epsilon added. This became somewhat complicated when we'd have an initial vowel. And in this case, the vowel would actually get reduplicated and would turn normally into something like an eta here. Epsilon plus epsilon would equal eta, but something like alpha plus alpha iota diphthong will become eta with a diphthong, or eta with a iota subscript. Now, lastly, we came into these double initial consonants. Our psis, our zetas, our xis, and then also things like sigma ta, where we'd have a complex sound. And for these, the reduplication just showed its form in a epsilon tacked on to the beginning. It was not a past indicative augment, which only occurs in past tense verbs, and in the indicative, this appears everywhere, even on infinitives. So we're going to be dealing more with how consonants behave when they join together in the next section, because when we're dealing with these strong aorists, when we start putting them next to endings that also have consonants, we would run into something like that, chmai. Sometimes you can do this, sometimes you can't. There's a sequence of kind of rules for this, and that's all on page 223 of Shelmerdine's text, and it's also in our next video. See you then.